Hello, Dying Your Way podcast members. I am so happy to welcome Michael Hebb to the Dying Your Way podcast. There are probably many of you that know who Michael Hebb is, but for those of you who don't, um, he created Death Over Dinner. He is one of the creators of the End of Life Collective, which Dying Your Way is part of. And that is an initiative that with Round Glass, which is doing a lot of great work across the globe to uplift a lot of different topics, death being one of them. He's also an author and international speaker. And I just want to thank you so much, Michael, because I know how busy you have been, particularly in the last few weeks. So thanks so much for taking the time to come on our podcast.
Absolutely. Honored to be here.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really found interesting when I was doing research for this is your architectural background. And that was one of the professions when I was a child that I really so wanted to be when I grew up. And I guess because I didn't do well in math and it was a guy's profession, I let that dream slip by. But I like a pattern language is like my all-time favorite book. And I love the philosophical approach that you bring to architecture and how you have designed structures that support a lot of different initiatives, but certainly end of life. And you bring in that structural support that's needed and that it's virtual too in ways that are really supportive. So, I love that about your approach. So, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So one of the things that I know that you had a hard time with growing up was that your father had early onset Alzheimer's. My mom died of Alzheimer's. It wasn't early onset, but I know what that can be like. But that you were so young and that he passed in your early adolescence, what that, must have been like for you. So in that, I think tell us, if you don't mind, what that was like for you and what kind of impacts it has on how we sanitize and push death away culturally.
Yeah. Well, my father was actually 72 years old when I was born. Um,
Oh, okay. It wasn't early onset.
yeah, so understandable
Yeah.
that the math would compute. But yeah, he was born in 1904. And I was the last of almost 50 years of baby making. And so I have an 83-year-old half brother, etc. So
Oh, my word.
it's a fascinating family. We don't call it a family tree. It's a little bit more of a family bush. It's gone a bit horizontal, but so he was, quite a bit older, obviously, in very good shape. But, I think it's an interesting thing to have children when you're that age, because with certain amount of likelihood that you're not going to see their high
Mm,
school graduation,
mm,
uh, that you're most likely not going to be there for, um, you know, the the wedding or the college graduation or a lot of their life.
yeah.
And I never got to have those philosophical conversations with my dad, being like, tell me about how you feel about this, being a father in your golden years. But the um, the diagnosis was very, very rough, and the leading up to the diagnosis was a very, very hard time for our family, because my dad was losing his faculties, and it wasn't back then. Alzheimer's wasn't a thing that we all knew about. It was not too long after the 36-hour day had come out, the
Okay.
book
Okay.
that made it a household name. And so there just really wasn't an understanding of it. And my mom um, was in shock, and the rest of the family was in denial. And then the whole thing was dealt with very poorly. He was diagnosed with it when I was in second grade, and he died when I was 13.
Mm.
And the lack of conversation, the lack of resources that my family had, the lack of skill or literacy around a terminal diagnosis or an imminent death, or even just Alzheimer's, like that there are going to be good days and bad days. And let's celebrate, when there is some clarity, when there is some cognition, when there's still a lot left of a human being, as you walk through that continuum,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
They have
and
emotional life.
yeah, they have a deep emotional, they have a deep relationship to their history too.
Mm.
And there's still that core person for such a long period. And so really was a tragedy that impacted me and our whole family, almost like this this slow motion bomb going off. And you could see all of the family connections and ties being damaged or severed,
Mm.
people being deeply impacted and traumatized in the family, and we're still reeling from it. We haven't
Really?
healed. Oh, sure. I mean, some of us have done a lot of work, done a lot of healing, but for a family to heal
Yeah.
takes a pretty remarkable concerted effort. And yeah, I mean that's the early inspiration for Death Over Dinner. It's not like when I was 13, I was like, I'm
Yeah.
going to work.
Yeah.
End of life is my
Yeah.
calling.
Yeah.
But to not want anybody else to have the experience that I had, to have it become a shameful thing that somebody has a diagnosis, to have it no place for grief. We talk about grief like it's just this is thing or this overwhelming thing. And the reality is a lot of people don't know how to access their grief
True.
because their family didn't model it, or they weren't given the tools, or the classic refrain that boys don't cry. Um, and it took me until I was in my 20s to really access the grief of losing my father, and in a completely unrelated experience, like during a breakup. So yeah,
Interesting. How did the rest of your older siblings, how did they fare with it?
terribly. Everybody was deeply traumatized. My brother got very angry. I ended up getting quite philosophical and then interested in spirituality and mysticism.
Yeah.
And it really because I felt very separate from my my peers after my father died. I realized that there was something there was a part of me that was very, very different. And my perspective on things was very different than
Yeah.
um, my peers. And so I started asking questions, trying to fill that void. But I felt really kind of, like I was on a different sphere or a different plane or a different planet. And kind of thank God.
Is your mom still alive?
She is. Yeah, she
Oh,
is.
that's good.
She's in the 80s.
Yeah.
But
Life goes on for sure.
and
Yeah. I mean, I'm just very aware of this group of mainly elderly people that are just marginalized and, hidden, and they need so much support, and the lack of us being able to see them go through their end stage of life. When it's our time, we have no clue what to do because we haven't seen it. We haven't been part of it. So, yeah.
yeah,
So there's a death positive movement, which Deanna Cochran is, my mentor with quality of life care. She loves you, by the way. She made a point of saying how much she loves you. But I want to just Tell us a little bit about the death positive movement, how that a group of people came together that really purposefully or maybe not purposefully started this, and how is it doing and where is it going?
Yeah, so I think that many of us were deeply inspired by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, certainly. Um, and then the next, I'd say, generation of leaders, the Ira Byocs and the Frank Ostaszewskis and the Katie Butlers of the world. Um, and and it seems like we've now the next generation, not that those folks aren't still contributing at an incredibly high level, but there's an expanded next generation that was inspired by Ira and Frank, etc. And it's just as it's like any kind of generational extension. It's just grown so significantly.
Yeah.
So I think it's less that a bunch of people got together and said, let's start this movement. It's more that so many of us were inspired by groundbreaking work by Ira and Stephen Jenkinson and some really extraordinary,
Yeah.
and Deanna as well, for sure. And so now there's an army of people that are interested in changing our relationship to death. And for me, it's less about death positivity. I actually kind of bristle a little bit when people say the good death movement or death positive movement, because for me, death is just terrible. And it's unknowable and it's terrible. And I don't want to make anyone feel like I'm trying to make it good. I'm interested in people having literacy around it.
Yeah.
And realizing that there is medicine there in facing the unknown. There's powerful medicine that can shape how we live our lives. And
what do you mean by medicine exactly?
well, I'll tell you a story. I was hosting a death dinner, and for those of you that don't know, Death Over Dinner is a platform we started 8 years ago as a free gift to the world, with the tools and the invitation and the inspiration to give people everything they need to host a dinner to talk about their mortality, and whether somebody has a terminal diagnosis, whether somebody's just wants to think about it spiritually or philosophically or get prepared in advance, or somebody's grieving or just lost somebody. So Death Over Dinner launched, and then it became this global movement. And actually we brought it to Australia with the Australian Centre for Health Research, and had a incredible run of dinners in Australia. They continue. I haven't touched base recently, but nonetheless, I was working on the healthcare edition of Death Over Dinner, and was invited to host a dinner with the cardiothoracic department at the Cleveland Clinic. And this is the heart surgery department that first successfully performed a heart transplant.
Yeah.
Right? And there were people from those care teams, doctors, emeritus doctors, that were at this dinner, and there's about 75 doctors and nurses and anesthesiologists and me. We had a little conversation before we started about credentials, and I don't have any letters before or after my name, and there were a lot of letters.
Yeah, a lot of letters.
Like, who is this guy? Who is former architect who wants us to talk about death, and people were there kind of begrudgingly. And I started the dinner by saying, okay, well, you all practice medicine without question, and you understand medicine as something that staves off disease and keeps people alive. And I was like, tonight I want you to imagine, and just for tonight, I want you to do something unreasonable, and I want you to imagine that death itself is the medicine. and you could just feel the whole, you could feel the room shift completely, and they got it, and they started to talk about things that they needed that were repressed, things that were suppressed, repressed, um, stories that had shame around them. And so when I say that death is a medicine, it's this doorway into talking about things
Okay.
that that we need to talk about and that we don't offer information to. So that's one aspect.
Yeah. Okay. I understand.
And it actually is true that repression, we know that repression causes disease.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But how do you actively change a repressive style? Right? You can work on it with your therapist, but it's a little bit different than working on it within your family structure. Like
And then culturally, yeah.
culturally, right? And so that's like death over dinner is a little bit like a group therapy practice. And when we've seen complete family shifts around dynamics and how they communicate with each other, because they get a good experience of feeling like it feels good to be vulnerable, like, and to be seen, and to it, like, you realize how beautiful your family is in
It
different
feels
ways.
good to just be sitting at the table. Yeah.
Sitting at the table, it feels good to reveal yourself
Yeah.
and to be revealed in a really meaningful way and non-scary way, because these dinners themselves aren't scary. And then that's a positive feedback loop. Like, we need to share our experiences with our family, or we don't live as long. And we
Yeah.
certainly, so yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of other reasons why facing immortality is spiritual medicine, but
No, I mean, I'm so literal. I heard the word medicine and I was just like, yeah, thanks for breaking that down. So I think I told you that I scheduled my first death over dinner, and I'm actually having it tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I loved going in there and looking at the intention and the scripts that came out with that. And I picked the philosophical and spiritual thing because everybody that's coming to the dinner party is going to they're in good health as far as I know. But I'm really looking forward to it. My husband's doing palik paneer, for dinner, and yeah, should be great. I'm looking forward to it a lot. So, what can the audience members get from just your hit of what to expect about these dinners when you have them, the benefit and what happens? Tell them a little bit about what happens.
For sure. So, I mean, the reason why we combine the conversation around death and dinner is that we wanted, one, we want people to have these conversations, but we want them to want to have them. And people, and we want it to be a beautiful experience. So the idea, you are eventually going to have a conversation about your mortality, either with your doctor, hopefully not, but possibly with an oncologist, palliative care physician, a lawyer if you're planning your will, insurance agent. Like, you are going to have these conversations. You're going to have the conversations about your parents or loved ones, etc., at some point. And the idea is, how can we give you some practice, some you know just skill and some depth of experience, and make it really, really beautiful. And we love dinner parties, right? Like, that's the thing. I mean, especially, yeah. I don't know what your lockdown is like right now in Australia, but we're we're about to go into a more severe lockdown than I think we've ever had before in the US. But nonetheless, we want people to light candles and create space, and pour a glass of wine if that's what they want, and to begin each dinner. Every dinner starts in the same way, and that's by honoring an ancestor. And you light a candle for somebody who had a positive impact on your life and has died. And that's a very, very intentional way of starting the dinner. Without, like, just within the first 10 minutes, this feeling in the room has changed completely. When somebody honors an ancestor, the experience becomes somehow not about their ego isn't as engaged. It's about something larger.
Yeah.
And depending upon how woo you are, you might feel like they're with you in some way. And we need all the help we can get around these topics.
I'm doing a mental check that I've got to be sure and have a box of tissue nearby.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so that sets the stage, and people are much more willing to go into terrain that they wouldn't otherwise talk about
Yeah.
after somebody in their life has died. And then we essentially kind of take steps from the shallow end of the pool to the deep end of the pool. And, you start with a question that maybe you've heard before, like, what's on your bucket list? Or what do you want to have as your last meal? Or, what song would you want played at your funeral, etc. So they're a little bit more recognizable.
Yeah.
So people can, it might be a little, there might be some laughter, etc. Some people take those ones, become very serious expression of emotion, but eventually get to questions that are, I think, more profound and can really impact the way people see their life in a really good way. Like, if you only had 30 days left to live.
That one.
Yeah.
That one got me.
Sure.
Who would you call? Yeah.
And how do you feel? And what are you going to spend your last 30 days doing? And the thing is that what is happening there is, I mean, for many people, it's the first time that they're really thinking about their mortality. And for those that have had near-death experiences, or have had a cancer scare, or have, successfully treated a life-threatening disease, they have had this type of confrontation. But for so many of us, it might be the first time you've actually been asked to confront that notion of, like, how would it feel to know that you have a limited amount of time?
Yeah.
And so that's really, really powerful. And then just we make sure people, every dinner is different. So the dinners aren't trying to solve the whole thing. Like, you pick your intention and you get a certain way through a certain amount of that conversation. But, some of the dinners, we want to make sure that people share what happens to their body, what they want the funeral to be like. And that's a very important bit of information to share with your loved ones, because then they know how to grieve, they know how to honor you, and they know how to honor you meaningfully, and then they can meaningfully grieve you. And that's, grief is hard enough. Like,
Right.
give your loved ones some symbolic, significant, meaningful way to honor your life. Tell them what you would like to have, or make it clear that you don't care. Right? Some people are like, I'm in the ground, I'm dead, I don't care. But if you don't tell that to your loved ones, where then they don't know that they have a freedom to express themselves around memorials and bereavement. So
I mean, I just think all of these conversations are so important. And, if nothing else, they're just planting seeds. So whether it's the dinners or listening to podcasts, or whether it's going to symposiums or going online and just do Google search, things about, so many different topics about death and dying. But yeah, there are so many incredible voices out there the Stephen Jenkinsons and that really transform how I think about death, Peter Fennick. It's just, and so many people that, are really lifting up this whole conversation little by little, that it's like death coming out of the closet in a way that is not as repressive as you were talking about.
Well,
So go ahead.
well, we've made death, we've tried to make death a medical act.
Yeah.
And medical professionals don't want it to be a medical act either. They've not like greedily grabbed it from us. There's no villain in it. It's just that a couple things. I mean, we decided to become a very Cartesian, very mechanized, industrialized culture, and that has impacted every part of society. It destroyed our food system. It destroyed our end of life, our death care system, really.
Yeah.
And what all of those, the Stephen Jenkinsons, the Elua Arthurs, the Claire Bidwell Smiths, all of these incredible people, what we're really trying to do is reclaim death as a community act. And,
yes.
And when we do that, there's a lot of different reasons, but one of the main reasons is it gives us the nutrients from the experience. When you over-industrialize something, you strip the nutrients out of the experience. And we need that. Like, we need to be able to confront it, be present to it, be involved in it, be engaged, be participating. Because there's things that we're going to learn that we need from it in our grief and in life, things, you lose somebody very, very close to you, you don't go back to the old life. You go, there's a wildly new life available to you, as long as you're willing to.
It seems like even that because of COVID, I'm always like looking for silver linings, but to see the heart-wrenching reactions that the medical community, the people that are in the ICUs, the nurses and the doctors, and their reaction to being the one that is, with that person when they're dying, and to see how gut-wrenching it is for them because they aren't the family and the family can't be in there and they're experiencing death on such a profound and institutional level, that they don't have the skills and the preparation themselves to deal with it. But possibly because of this, there will be a reframing and a rethinking of how we can work together, make this a more holistic life experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, so much of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work and Ira Byock's work and Frank Kostasevsky's work was formed during the AIDS pandemic. That
right.
really informed the caregivers that they became, and really informed the current state of end-of-life care and the current, movement and like really explosion of interest. And so I think if we do want to find a silver lining, I think that right now we are seeing the future of compassionate care getting shaped.
Yeah.
We now are really getting the importance of community and the importance of ritual. And when you can't go to a funeral, when you can't be at the bedside, and it's fine that there are new apps or technologies that are being developed, but no one actually thinks that those are a replacement for an actual embodied human experience.
Right.
So it really has, I think, clarified for people how we do need a huge network around these type of experiences.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the End of Life Collective and what that design and that structure is and how that's working. And I'd like them to hear about the End of Life Collective because it's a good resource, and I just am curious how it's growing and Just tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, it just launched in August, as you know. So it's brand new, and we're very much just in our beta. It is a technology platform, and it is based upon a social network. So instead of just designing a planning tool, because I very clearly saw after we started Death Over Dinner that there wasn't there was no one to send people after we got them excited about, or at least willing to make a comprehensive end of life plan. I had to send them to about 10 different places to cobble it together.
Right.
And then when they need providers, then you're sending them to another 20 different places, et cetera. So very early on, after Death Over Dinner launched, I knew that there needed to be a comprehensive community and platform of providers and resources and tools. It just was very clear that it needed a tremendous amount of resource, technological resource, to do it properly. That you couldn't just do it, a little slice of it. Then you're just providing another service, essentially. And I was like, I want a platform that elevates all of the service providers up and then makes it very easy for a family, if they're in the middle of a crisis or they're just planning, to get everything done in one place. So yeah, we launched in August as a beta. It's still very, very much in process. But there are already about 450 providers in one place. They have their own provider pages and microsites, and they offer their services. And that'll grow considerably over the next year. There's incredible resources from experts like all of the folks that we've mentioned today already, who are shared their wisdom. There are events, free events, and there will be paid events. We're about to launch courses. So again, all of those people that we mentioned will be hosting courses on EOL.
That's great. I'll be honest with you, as an end-of-life doula, one of the things that is an issue when you're supporting someone is access to, and these are the things I consistently have trouble finding and that they need, are palliative care doctors that provide early palliative care, community nursing, and then just the public policies that are in place to support it. Now, it's different here in Australia, obviously, than it is in the United States. But I'm reading papers and things here that are looking at more integrative care, not just at the end of life, but through life. So palliative care, it doesn't come up as an issue. It's just sort of an automatic. So if you have mental illness, there's integrated care. If you've got addiction, that's there, end of life. So it's just a natural thing. So there's not this thought that, you're dying 7 days later, you get hospice, which is not the way you want it to go at all.
No, and the thing is, what I saw was the healthcare systems weren't going to tackle the full continuum of care. They weren't going to include, figure out a solution that includes lawyers for wills and trusts and, life insurance and memory care and acute care, and then also death care, right there. And then death care isn't concerned about the palliative side, right? So you have these very disconnected, siloed worlds.
Yeah.
And until they're actually all in one place and they can see each other and start to work together, it makes total sense why it would be so difficult for an individual or a family to pass through that continuum of services, because they don't even know each other. They're not anywhere. There is nowhere that they're actually connected. There's no main street you can walk down that has all of the providers, and so no wonder it's a disaster and a hardship. And I mean, that's I created a working group as soon as COVID hit, and we ended up creating the COVID paper together, and that's covidpaper.org, which is
Oh,
the white paper focused on grief, death, dying, and funerals during the COVID age. And we knew that people would need new tools and resources and no existing.
great.
And it was the first time that I know of that medical directors were working with funeral directors, which is ridiculous, right? That they should have a very lively relationship,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And we kind of throw it to chaplains to bridge those two worlds. And chaplains, they're not there for logistics. They're there for spiritual support, right? And yet you're like, well, no, you deal with all of the logistics. And it's like, no, like, yeah, we need to get over this idea that healthcare is just about beating and winning about disease. The Cleveland Clinic, they used to say, no one comes to the Cleveland Clinic to die. And it's like, Adrian Boise, the chief experience, it's like, no, lots of people come to die at the Cleveland Clinic. Let's be real about it and let's do it better. And that kind of, that revolution that's happening within healthcare systems, this death positivity or willingness is going to completely transform. And we start thinking about compassionate care all the way along the line.
Well, that overlapping of responsibilities that you were talking about is what I'm talking about, the gaps that exist in Australia too. I mean, it's not like it's a perfect medical system here either, but that integrated care and overlap, easy handoff from one to the other because there is communication, and because there is some sort of unified public policy in that kind of healthcare continuum. Yeah, I love that word, that supports that. And I think another thing is just the transactional nature, that all these different industries have that think competitively instead of collaboratively in what it is that they do. I mean, how do you avoid that kind of hype and that point of view, particularly in the end of life collective?
Well, for me, I'm not that concerned about it because what we've built is a community, not while we have a quote unquote marketplace, it's because people need services, but it's not a mall. And it's not about transaction or competition. It's really about elevating those service providers so people can actually understand all of the pieces, because they're not literate when it comes to acute palliative care, end of life care, hospice, etc. And so, without literacy, like any kind of literacy, you don't have empowerment. So people aren't able to make empowered decisions. And so we're still the very beginning. And when people become more literate, when you can see all those services side by side and not siloed, competition and taking advantage of people kind of goes out the window. Right? Like, I think that actually becomes turned down instead of turned up. It's only when people are divided, and you can take advantage of them because they don't know that there are better services for less, etc. So yeah, I mean, we're not creating the Amazon of death and dying. We're creating ecosystem compassionate. And there's definitely a lot of money to be made in this space, which for me is more about what is the innovation that we can bring to the space, and where can investment be made to improve people's experiences? Because as it stands right now, there's not a lot of investment in the end of life space because you can't even visualize it. right? Like it's no one can when we were trying to figure out how even big is the market, and no one had that we could find had actually put all of the numbers together between end of life care and death care and planning and considered it a singular industry, but of course it is.
Yeah.
It's one of the largest industries there is.
Well, and the numbers are certainly there, but it's the willingness for any consumer to go there, because that means they have to talk about their own death. And people
Well,
don't want to do that generally.
the thing is, they will go there and it will cost them more.
Exactly.
Like I tell people, like, it's kind of like, hey, if we're going to plan a trip to Italy and we said, let's go to Italy in a year, and let's be really thoughtful about the plan. Now, if I said to you, let's go to Italy and let's drive to the airport right now. And we're going to have a very different, maybe more exciting.
Yeah.
Trip, very romantic. Like
very expensive.
5 times, maybe 10 times as expensive, etc. And so it is definitely all of these things you are going to pay for ultimately, but they may not be getting what you want, and you may be staying in like the crappy inn versus the unbelievable deal you got on the on the coast. So.
I love that business model that talks about you can have there are 3 things: time, money, and quality. Of those 3 things, you can have 2, but you can't have all 3. So if you have no time, it's going to cost you a lot of money, but you maybe can have quality with that too, but you can't. It's interesting looking at it from that perspective. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also when you create a community, and you expose what everybody's doing to each other, there's not a lot of room for bad actors. Like that's what we created for EOL. I had a list of 400 providers that I trusted, that I knew, and that I've been working with over the last decade, and were vetted. And we went and we talked to 400 providers, and all 400 of them said yes. And 100% of the people we talked to said, of course, we'll be part of this community and we'll create it. And now that signals to anybody else, if you're doing something shady, this is not the community to be in.
Go away.
It would be a very high risk.
Yeah.
So, and then we, a lot of our providers, community leaders, and so they can actually vet people that are coming into the organizations and new providers as well. And to self kind of police sense of quality.
That's good. I really want to be sure that people hear about other projects that you're involved in too. Would you repeat again? Because I hadn't heard about the white paper, the website for that.
Just covidpaper.org.
Okay, covidpaper.org. Yeah, I'm going to look that up. That sounds like really important right now. And I saw the livingwake.org. You want to say a little bit about a living wake?
Yeah, I mean, that'll be incorporated into EOL as well. Essentially, everything that I'm working on is now represented on EOL. But yeah, we inspired by my 40th birthday, where my best friends ended up throwing me a living funeral. We decided to create a set of resources so people could, throw living funerals for themselves or for loved ones. If there's a milestone birthday or somebody does have a terminal diagnosis, a lot of people, more and more people, have that kind of, Tom Sawyer desire to be at their own funeral. And I get, it's what good are your eulogies when I'm dead? And It's so I don't think living funerals I haven't seen as like a massive movement happening. I think it could at some point when again there's more and more of this death literacy and more of this comfort with the conversation.
Yeah. I do want to tell the audience about your TED Med talk. So if they get a chance to go to YouTube and look at the TED Med talk, Michael Hebb, it was a wonderful talk. I loved it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Really, really good. And also you're doing this slow walking are you doing it with Deanna, or she was the first one, or how is that? What is the slow walking series?
Yeah, the slow walk. It's a live podcast series that Deanna and I are doing together. So we'll start inviting in guests. We haven't. It just came from the fact that we really adore each other and wanted to spend time slowing down and being in conversation. But so that's happening. That's on EOL as well, and we have a quarterly series called The Endless Table, which is part of our collaboration with the Conversation Project. And the idea is to gather recipes and stories from departed loved ones. So
Right.
tapped into some of the best chefs in the world to share recipes and stories with us. And again, this is just a way of humanizing this topic. I mean, people say people are afraid of talking about death. It's like people are talking about death all the time. People are talking about grief all the time. But if you want them to talk about it more or directionally, you have to invite them in beautiful ways, right? It's like, people say we should have the talk. It's like, well, I'm not available for that. You just said two things that told me that I don't want to be there. He said that I should,
Yeah.
And then you just elevated it to the talk. Like no one wants to have that. Like your blood pressure increases. It's just the notion of either of those things. And so it's what are these beautiful and poetic ways we can reach people around these topics that are so important. And another one is the Last Sound Registry. We are working with Yoko Sen on this registry, essentially in a musical advanced care directive.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, so we asked people, what is the last sound you want to hear? And so working with leading musicians and composers who are responding to that. And it's, these are again, just the very, very early days. I just found out that James Beard Foundation, which is the most important food organization in the US, is partnering with us on the Endless Table. And we have Alice Waters coming and Jose
Waters. Wow. Love her.
Alice hates talking about death, right? And she's not a fan. Alice and I are good friends, but I don't know why she doesn't like talking about death, because she doesn't like talking about it. And so I don't push her.
Yeah.
And so I've just said, okay, that's fine, and then I know that her mentor, Lulu, who really is this woman from Provence who inspired her and Richard Olney and Kermit Lynch and all of these giants in the American and really global food space. This 4'6" French woman in Bandol completely changed their lives, taught Alice like what food could be, and that it's much bigger than what's on the plate. And she died in October at the age of 102. And I said, I wonder if Alice would be willing to talk about Lulu and her legacy. And so I texted Alice like 10:30 at night one night. I was like, would you be willing to come on a Zoom event and talk about Lulu? And Dan Barber will be there, and Tembe Locke and some people like that. And she's like, I would love to, and so now that's, and she was still, if people, I don't know when this airs, but the event will be available via video, even if this podcast comes out after it. But is so brave and beautiful in the topic. And when we had the conversation, and it just goes to show, it is not that people don't want to talk about death. They may not want to talk about it the way that you want to talk about it. Like, you really have to be compassionate. You really have to use it almost like a courtship, and like see where is the right moment. And I never thought I was get Alice to, she's the most important food person in my life, and like it's just, and we just had the most delightful time. I ended up taping our session because she was like, I don't know if I want to do it live because if I get emotional. I was like, that's fine, Alice. We'll tape it, and then everyone else can be live.
Oh, I won't miss that one. I really won't. So even if it may be a couple of weeks before this actually gets up onto YouTube, but if people want to go to it, they can go to the EOL Collective and go to the Slow Walking podcast series. Is that how to listen to it?
Well, no, it has Slow Walk is its own thing. The Endless Table series is, so on EOL there's many recurring event series. Slow Walk is just one. Endless Table is one.
Okay.
Last Sound Registry is one. Yeah, so they can come to EOL, and it's just EOL.community is the URL. So
Okay.
easy for people to remember.
Okay, that's good. Well, we'll add the links in there so people can go there. Well, okay, so if there are listeners that want to find out more about what we've talked about or a way to get hold of you, how do you deal with that? You have your people, or do they go to your website, or how do you want people to get in touch with you?
I mean, they can find me at EOL.community. I mean, quite frankly,
Okay. Yeah.
If someone joins and says, "Hey, Michael Hebb, I want to talk to you," then they've got my attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just been so delightful talking to you today, Michael, and you've really been an inspiration, just for the artistry that you bring to this. I really think of you as an artist, and I just thank you for making it so easy to have these conversations. And I'll let you know how my dinner goes.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to hear. I can't wait to hear.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
All right.